on, is it not?
Yes, yes. All right, thank you guys. Let's have a word of prayer. Thank you, Yeshua, for this awesome opportunity to speak to my friends again. Thank you that we get to meet in a warm place, and please let each person hear what they need to hear and receive whatever they need to receive. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for your goodness and for teaching me and my dad these concepts even though it was painful. And thank you for your victory in Yeshua. Amen. This is part 2. Part 1, we covered the levels of the brain and how it affects the functioning of your left brain. And then we did a swarm here talking about how whether in health or whether in human relationships, the truth helps all the cells to communicate correctly, which refers to people in the community, and it helps them to become themselves. And if this is a lie, what happens is it messes up people's ability to work together. So I have a chart here that's called a maturity chart. And I'm going to read through the first page here and then I can pass it around. Because basically this is the second piece of what my dad and I talk about, which is that when a person grows up, they have to go through certain stages of emotional maturity. There are certain tasks they have to complete, and each task requires a certain task for the community that they're a part of to do for them, or their parents when they're small. And then the chart also shows what happens if these tasks fail. All of us have had tasks that fail, and that affects our ability to function. When you look at this chart, you're going to have a mixture of relief. These will say, oh, that's why such and such doesn't work. But it's also going to be sad because you're going to feel like, oh no, I'm missing a lot of things. How am I able to function? I would suspect maybe 1 in 100 men have finished all of these tasks. So 1 in 200 men have finished all of these tasks for infant, child, and adult. And if you are a woman, probably 1 in 100, because statistically women are more emotionally mature than men. This is just a fact across the board. So if you're a mature man, you're fortunate. So here's a personal task. Just close your eyes and think about your early life. This is the personal task, and then what the community or family does, and what happens when the tasks fail. Here we go. First personal task, this is an infant from birth to age 3. Personal task number 1, lives in joy, expands capacity for joy, learns that joy is one's normal state, and builds joy strength. Community and family task. Parents delight in the infant's wonderful and unique existence. When the task fails, weak identity, fear and coldness dominate bonds with others. Personal task number 2, develops trust. Parents build strong, loving bonds with the infant, bonds of unconditional love. When the task fails, has difficulty bonding, which often leads to manipulative, self-centered, isolated, or discontented personality. Number 3, learns how to receive. Community and family task, gives care that matches the infant needs without the infant asking. When the task fails, is withdrawn, disengaged, self-stimulating, and unresponsive. Number 4, begins to organize self into a person through relationships. The community or family discovers the true characteristics of the infant's unique identity through attention to the child's behavior and character. When the tasks fail, has an inability to regulate emotions. Number 5, learns how to return to joy from every unpleasant emotion. We covered this yesterday, the paths back to joy from the 6 negative emotions. Community and family provides enough safety and companionship during difficulties, so the infant can return to joy from any other emotion. When the task fails, has uncontrollable emotional outbursts, excessive worry, and depression, avoids or gets stuck in certain emotions. So when I read these, did anything register either with yourself or with somebody that you know. Yeah, this is, when my parents and I first saw this, I think we talked for 3.5 hours that night, because we suddenly realized this explains all our challenges, you know. Because when you put something into your left brain and you come to understand some truth in Scripture, it doesn't automatically fix your right brain if it wasn't trained. It's the same as riding a bike, you know. If you read like the book of Romans and you master it, you'll know what it says, you'll feel confident in God's love, but you still can't ride a bike. You still have to learn that skill. It's the same with right brain skills. It's like riding a bike, driving a car, you know. If a person knows how to resolve conflict, this is going to automatically work in the brain. If not, every time there's conflict, you can tend to run, you know. Like I have the experience where I may meet people, and I'm not sure what to say to them, and I watch their face, like, shall I say this, or shall I say this? And sometimes I'll walk away, because I feel like I don't want to make somebody uncomfortable, but I feel stuck. And God has assured me that I don't have to come across perfectly to be a blessing, so I just move ahead, you know. You don't have to have all your armor assembled before you walk into battle, you know. So anyways, now I want to pass this around, and just take a look at that.
Okay, thanks.
And you can also scroll down, because, you know, there's child and adult too. I'm going to read some more, and while you're doing that, I'm going to erase this and cover a few of these, because I have the same chart on my phone, so I don't need to look at that particular device again. Peter's precious flat screen laptop. So, let's take a look at the implications of living in joy and what happens when it doesn't work. You see, the brain has a default setting. And if your brain is set to joy as the default, I'll put it over here because I like the right brain. There's joy, and this is supposed to be your default. And over here, like, we'll put shame, anger. I could put all 6 negative emotions. This just makes it more visual. There's only 6 of them. And so when your brain tends to hang out on one of these, it could be simply because joy is not your default. So I want you to think back to your childhood when you were growing up and think, what was the emotion that was most common in your home? Was it joy or was it something else? What was the default when there wasn't some situation that changed things? If it wasn't joy, then your brain has set that emotion as the default. And for the rest of your life, when you do have something joyful, your brain tends to pull from that back to one of these because it feels normal. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sadness is the 6th one. So this is the first thing that an infant learns when they're young. They look into their mother's face and they say, is their mother joyful? Is their mother in shame or something else? Because the brain thinks, okay, if my mother's always in a negative emotion, I should feel that too so I can connect to her. Because the brain has what's called a, picking up the word priority stack, or there's an order in which it chooses things. It's going to prefer to connect to people over being happy. If you have to choose between being happy and being alone, or being sad and being with the person that you're bonded to, you're going to choose to be sad so you can connect to them. So when you're a mother, your kids will tend to copy the emotion that you're feeling most of the time. My mother had anger, fear, anger, and disgust. Those were the 3 that she felt a lot. And so when I was around her, I tended to feel these same things. And in fact, the brain goes one step further. Have you ever had an experience where you had friends and you thought they were your friends and you found that they were really your parents' friends, and when you met them when your parents weren't there, you felt kind of uncomfortable? I had that, like I want to have friends for myself, you know. So like when I was in Hawaii, when I'm here, I meet new people and they're my friends.
Yeah,
My
that's
dad
right.
doesn't know them yet, and so
Yeah.
that's like a feeling of empowerment, you know.
Yeah, it is.
So what happens is when you're stuck in one of these emotions, like I said yesterday, and you want to get back to this place called Joy Camp, you just have to pray. I mean, one thing that this implies, I'm realizing, is it shows us how to give intelligent prayers. Because what we do is we know what to pray for. Like, dear God, I'm not happy a lot. Could you please bring me a friend or a situation that will put me into joy most of the time? Because when your brain gets defaulted to joy, then you're not going to feel as much of these. And how do you do that? You find friends who are joyful most of the time, and have a reset like how you feel when you shop, how you feel when you're watching a film, how you feel when you eat, because whatever you do with this person, it's going to overwrite the negative emotion that was tied to a certain activity. Like for me, I didn't like doing laundry because laundry was tied to stress. So a woman in Hawaii literally did laundry with me, and I reset my brain's view of that activity because she was a happy person. And ever since then, laundry feels different because now I'm looking at her face and her emotions instead of my mom's.
Yeah.
So that's an example of how can you program any task. Anything that stresses you, you don't have to stay in the stress. You just have to find somebody who enjoys doing that, and if you do it with them, it resets everything. I mean, I think you're seeing too that everybody needs community all the time, you know. Because if you could fix these things just by reading a book, well then everybody would be very mature and successful. Like, I've got it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I can just,
Oh, you might have to say, overload,
there it is.
if it's not faulted.
Okay, there we are. Like, look at this. Develops trust. When you have somebody who you can't trust very well, then how can you develop trust? Like, I trusted you, but you let me down, you know. I wanted you to do something and you didn't carry it out. There's some people where they don't even know what you trusted them for. You thought you told them, but they didn't connect to that. So, this can also be a point of pain, you know. When I was 9 years old, my mother yelled at me for something embarrassing in school, and so I didn't trust her, because it was like, if I tell you what's on my heart, maybe I'll get yelled at again for like 45 minutes, and so I had nightmares about her face till I was 22, you know. I was a sensitive child. So, I was able to get over it when I began to tell her what I was going through, even though I was afraid of her, and then the nightmares stopped. There were a few after that, but not very many, because my brain said, okay, she is a safe person after all, you know. But unfortunately, to the day of her death, it never fully switched. I worked at it, you know. She said she was very sorry, she would cry, you know. But we needed more community, and we had friends, but they came to our house for us to help them. But we had no friends, so we could go to their house for them to help us, you know. And I said to my parents, we're at the top of the pile. Where's people upstream from us, you know? Because people says, oh, we're so glad you guys are here, you guys have it all figured out, and we're like, if only that was true. So I've learned, you know, you can be happy even if you're struggling in the ditch. Because everybody deals with this, but not everybody knows how to talk about it, you know. This is like a framework to say, there's a way out of any problem, and also, the more you share, the more you can get healed. You can say, God, you know, who can I talk to about this, you know. The other thing we found is that counselors aren't able, you know, to help people a lot, because to have somebody who really helps you through something, it has to be a permanent bond. And the counselors are trained to have temporary bonds. Where you leave the office, they no longer know you. Because of professional protection, because they don't want to have an inappropriate bond between the counselor and the counselee. Well, the problem is, unless you have an actual bond, the only thing, this is the brain, the only thing that you're fixing is the left brain, which is the sorter. And so when you're sorting the ideas in your left brain, your right brain stays just as sick as it was before. no techniques will fix this, you know. There's no technique for driving a car if you don't have that skill, you know. I remember the first time that I drove, I was doing 35 miles an hour down this curvy road in Berrien Springs. I could barely keep the car on the road. That was the first time I drove. I was 18. 6 months later, I could do 80, keep it straight with one hand, you know, no problem. So, you can become, sometimes you'll become very good at the very thing that you were poor at, you know, because God says, in order to bring you beauty for ashes and to build old waste places. Yeah. Look that up, it says that in Isaiah, and it means I'm going to build up the pieces of your heart that were broken down. So all of these things in the right hemisphere that aren't working, that promise is actually in the Bible to restore you and heal you. And thankfully I can find this text in about 15 seconds.
Is it beauty for ashes?
Waste places.
Oh.
And so this is very important for realizing that you're not stuck, you know. Because I'm making sure that if you feel a negative emotion through what I am sharing with you, that you do not get stuck in that sadness. Okay, listen to these two texts. For Yahweh shall comfort Zion. This is Isaiah 51:3. And I can text you guys the thing because I have everyone's number in the list. He will comfort all her waste places. Those are the parts of our heart that are broken, like I've been describing, like I'm going to describe. He'll make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of Yahweh. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. And then chapter 52, verse 9, break forth into singing, sing together, ye waste places of Jerusalem. When's the last time you felt like singing about your worst weaknesses? You often want to hide them. You don't want to talk about them. But this says break forth into singing and sing about the very places where you feel stuck. You know, like if you're always lonely, sing about that. If you're stuck in shame, sing about that, you know. If you have pervasive, inexplicable fear, sing about that, you know. If you're always wondering, is my brain injured, you know, from things I did to myself when I was in Hawaii, you know. Because I need to be honest with you, this is a pain that I feel every day. Because if you have a pain that's like a dripping faucet, this is my personal dripping faucet. When I was in Hawaii, trying to help my brain heal, I took psychedelic mushrooms. And instead of helping me heal, it seemed to injure my mind. And so every hour of every day I have the sense, did I lose some of my intelligence? And remember, I'm the guy that was depressed for 2 weeks because I forgot something. So you can only imagine the anguish of feeling that I've lost some major circuits up there, you know. So my dad and I talk about this often. He assures me everything is okay,
Yeah.
that my brain, when I'm lonely, it starts to function less well, you know, like I showed over here. And I just choose to believe that. God said to me, get your sleep, get your food, fulfillment, friends, and exercise, your brain's going to work just fine. God said that. But part of me has a hard time believing that. Because see, if you feel like something isn't true, to have faith and believe, I know this is true. I feel like I can't do anything right, but Yeshua says I can. And the righteousness in Yeshua. I know this is true, you know. That's how you literally fight against the devil with the Bible, is to repeat texts that say the opposite of what your emotions feel like. And you repeat it, and you call your friends and say, I'm going to repeat this, you know, until you break through, until your emotions catch up with what the Word says. That's what sanctification is in a huge part, you know. We can, before we get to heaven, start to feel like what this Word says, you know. That's where I want to get to. Because otherwise it's miserable, you know. I thought I had to be miserable every day until Yeshua came back when I was a child. And I realized I don't. And it says it again. Oh, let me finish this verse because it gets better. Break forth into joy, sing together, ye waste places of Jerusalem. For Yahweh has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. Now does that say he will comfort? What did I just read?
He has.
Yes, so that's past tense. So if it's past tense, it's kind of like your emotional pain could be described as hunger. Well, here's the food already on the table. You don't have to wait for it to be purchased and prepared. You just go ahead and eat it. And so all these emotional pains we have, the answer has already been given us in Yeshua. That's part of the meaning you see of his sacrifice on the cross, was He gave us the healing for all our emotional wounds. Like it says in Isaiah, I was bound, I had wounds and bruises and putrefying sores in my heart, and there was nothing that I could do about it. But when Yeshua died on the cross, He says, I'm giving you the healing for everything, a full package, And so it's there for you to receive. You don't have to be stuck. Isaiah 58:12, and they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. That's kind of like what I'm doing and other people are doing. If I help people build up where they're stuck, then I'm one of the builders, the builders of Yah's kingdom of Jerusalem, They shall raise up the foundations of many generations. That sounds like, going into your past and saying, grandfather had a problem, dad had a problem, I've got the same problem. That happened to me, What was it? I thought I was better than other people because I had a good mind. My grandfather, he got his PhD by age 28. Very smart man, The professors we worked with, they sometimes felt shy around him, or they felt intimidated because the man was always ahead of them with less work than they had to do. He could write a paper out of his mind, references, ideas, and everything. Didn't have to open a book because it was all in his head, And sit at the typewriter, type it out, 2 pages, send it, done. No spelling mistakes. That's the kind of person he was, So I had the feeling, if I can perform as well as he did, then I'm worth something. But if I can't, then I'm behind. And so that's what I had since childhood. It's one thing if you feel I can't perform well, what am I going to do, But it's something else if you feel I can perform that well, and then as your relationships don't work, your left brain turns off and you think you have Alzheimer's. No, it's just that everybody's mind, whether they're super intelligent or not, their left brain needs that love to stay functioning. And if they don't get enough of this, slowly over the years they have a leak in their brain, and slowly their capacity seems to be draining out and they have no idea why, Well, that's why. Their tank, their joy tank, needs to be filled in, When you fill this in with joy, then what you get over here is IQ. You get a lot more intelligence by enjoying being with people than by studying a book. Interesting. The number of times waste places is in the whole scripture is 7 times. Not 6, not 8, but 7, And 7 is a precious number, as we all know. Thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in.
The Sabbath too.
Yes. And 5 of them here are very, very encouraging. Yes. Okay, let's read a little more here. And then...
You just touched the screen and it should wake up, or did it?
Yes, it wakes up. This is a big thing. The 3rd task is learns how to receive. You see, if a person hasn't learned how to receive, then it's kind of like being hungry and being at a potluck, but you don't have a mouth. And so you don't know how to receive that food that you need. Because before you can ask for what you need, first you have to experience somebody meeting your needs without you asking. And if you've missed this, how do you learn this when you're 40, 50 years old, This is where you need community again. Somebody who's close enough to you, they can figure out what you need before you say anything. And once your brain experiences that, it's like, oh, somebody meets my needs without me asking, then you can go to the next stage, which is to ask for what you need, and then you'll find that that skill is now in your brain, This is tremendous. I've had to learn this, Would you imagine that until I was 22 years old and I'd visit a friend's house, I was afraid to ask to use their bathroom. I would just freak out, So I wouldn't go to people's houses because I was fearful they wouldn't understand me, And I was afraid that they would see my facial expression would be all awkward and then I would just be stuck, But I had a lot I wanted to say, but I didn't know how to get it to people, I'd look at them and they'd talk about things that I thought were not interesting or important, and I would just give up, And then you go into the room and you watch. After the event finishes, everybody pairs off into groups to talk. Everybody except me, and I watch everybody else have a good time, That probably happened to you about 100 times in my life. It's like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I connect? Do I have that? disability? Do they not like me? Why am I here? And your mind just goes into these loops. I know many people can relate to that. So, number 4, begins to organize self into a person through relationships. This literally means that if you don't have good relationships, your personality is going to stay dwarfed. Because, like when I'm talking here, half the energy is me communicating, and half the energy is you receiving it, so it's pulling it out of me as well as I'm giving it to you. That's how public speakers learn to do well, is they connect to their audience relation, and they can connect, one to many. First time I did this, I was afraid, but as soon as I got in front of my school, there were about 200 people in front of me, and I just began to talk, and the fear went away, never came back, So I had 10 minutes of agonizing stage fright before I stood up. Since then, not a molecule of fear, Like my grandfather, I can walk up, start talking about things with no preparation, it's all in my head. But that required getting past the fear. So think about this. This says if you don't have the ability, if you haven't organized yourself into a person through relationships, it says you have an inability to regulate emotions. Why? It's like if you have disgust and you have a friend over here, then you need to have someone to share that with. It's kind of like you have a weight, an emotional weight. You share it with them, they take it, and then you don't have it anymore. And then you learn, if I feel this emotion, there's somebody I can go to. And you learn that 6 times, 1 for each of these 6 emotions. You take your hopeless despair, you dump it on them, probably a different friend, Ideally this happens with your parents when you're like 2 to 4 years old, because then it's easy to handle, Same thing with fear. Once you learn that, this is why if you learn to have relationships, your emotions are no longer chaotic, because as soon as you feel the emotion, you think, oh, I can resolve this, I have a friend to help me. And this is learned in childhood. But if it isn't learned in childhood, then when you feel one of these emotions, you're going to be stuck for a lot longer, Either because, number 1, your brain hasn't tied the pathway back to joy. That's between birth and age 2, or when you're a child, you haven't found someone to confide in about your situation, By the way, when it comes to prayer, if you haven't had friends who you can share your feelings with, when you go to pray to God, that circuit is missing. When I learned this a few years ago, I would pray, that it was probably once every few months I could get into that mental space where I could pray about what I was thinking and feeling. Otherwise I would talk to God, but it was just ideas. It was like my soul was asleep, and I couldn't wake it up, I'd wake up, oh, this is awesome, my soul is alive, I don't know how I got here, but this is wonderful, Now I know if I seek connection to a person, I can get there within minutes. So, number 5, we kind of covered this yesterday. Learns how to return to joy from every unpleasant emotion. So this obviously is what I've just been describing, and it's very important. So, does anybody have any other thoughts about this, like an observation or a personal experience, before I go to the second chart, which is the child tasks? Everything I just read is ideally supposed to be finished by age 2, So it kind of shows you like how damaged most of us humans are. A lot of people haven't learned all those tasks, even as adults, and it's tragic.
Could you comment on the difference between hopelessness and despair?
Okay.
Hopelessness and even sadness, how are those separate?
Okay. Basically, hopeless despair is this feeling.
Oh, that's hopeless despair.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, the feeling that I'm never going to get back to what I've lost.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, each of those can be returned to joy, like I said yesterday, within 90 seconds ideally. So,
thank you.
This is the second stage. When you're a child, this is from age 3 to age 12. First personal task, asks for what is needed, can say what one thinks and feels. So it's like you know what you need. An infant doesn't even know what they need, They have to have their parent figure it out for them. I know a lady who wouldn't be able to tell when she was cold, because when she was a small child and she was cold, her mother would say, "You're not cold." And so she would believe her mother,
Yeah.
because when you're young, your mother is your reality.
That's so
And she
great.
believed her mother that she wasn't